That was a pretty strange Friday in Austria. It was kind of like a qualifying session at the end. Everybody panicking a little that if it did rain ridiculously on Saturday and the entire day was washed out, maybe the grid would be based on what happened in FP2. But most drivers, Max Verstappen, who was quickest today, think that if it is a washout on Saturday, that qualifying nonetheless will take place on Sunday morning. The forecast for Sunday at the moment is damp Sunday morning, but probably for a dry race. So that's probably the most likely. If it is a complete and utter torrent tomorrow being Saturday. So it was an interesting day, and we saw Red Bull Racing Point out there going almost as quickly as they did in qualifying the previous week, whereas Mercedes were kind of doing what they do, as you can imagine. Valtteri was doing lots and lots of jobless stuff, working hard, looking really good in the car, really confident. Lewis, a bit of a desultory Lewis, I thought, didn't really look to be with it today in terms of really wanting to get on and be energized. He was reasonably good, but then halfway through the second session, FP2, he came into the garage and basically said, car doesn't feel right, it's going away from me, let's do a setup check on it. And that was the rest of the day gone, because it's a pretty complicated thing, it seems, doing a setup on a Merc with the with all that complicated steering geometry they have now. So could that be Lewis saying, look, I'm not really into today anyway, it's going to be wet tomorrow, if it's a wet qualifying, I need to be thinking about that, and we're not going to achieve much more doing this today, and just sort of workload stuff that he wasn't really going to get to do. That's obviously not what he said afterwards. What he said afterwards was, the car didn't feel right, and I wanted the boys and the girls to look after, to go through it. And he was saying, I hope it's dry tomorrow and wet race, that would be the best outcome. But I think Lewis really hopes it's going to be wet qualifying and preferably a wet race. He loves the wet. Don't forget how good he was in Brazil quite recently. And also 2017 Monza, he was just fabulous as well in qualifying. So, Lewis, I think he's got so much going on around him, hasn't he? So much stuff going on. Won't go into all that, but we all know what it is. And, that is presumably a bit of it's not a distraction, it's a load, it's a heavy weight. And that's what I was trying to say over the winter about Lewis Hamilton. Whereas Valtteri, is just going along, isn't he? And he's just really doing a good job. So that was good to see. Max was fabulous as well to watch today, I thought, right on top of the car, the Red Bull Honda. I mean, the good news about Red Bull and Mercedes, all four cars were reliable from what I could see. And that's good news, bearing in mind how unreliable the Red Bulls were last week and how fragile the Mercedes were from halfway through the race with their gearbox issues, transmission issues. We saw Albon in various angles, a couple of big spins, or a small spin at the hairpin and then a big spin, high-speed spin at the change of direction, left then right towards the end of the lap. Didn't hit anything, but that just showed how knife edgy the Red Bull is when you're trying to run as little wing as possible. But obviously, the car isn't yet absolutely 100%, so they got to crank some on, and that balance was difficult. It was a knife edgy balance, but I thought Max was great to watch in that situation. Probably right now the Racing Point is a more drivable car than the Red Bull, I would suggest. May not be quite as quick, but it's very drivable, looks really good in all angles. And it was a disappointing race obviously last week, but they seem to have come back in a really good way, and both Sergio Perez and Lance Stroll really good today, good to watch, very confident, bearing out what I've been saying, what I said in a video last week about customer cars. Let's have them, please, bring them on, because that is as near at the moment as you can get to having a customer car in Formula One, and why not have more of them? It's logical to me. Ferrari, they had some upgrades here, floor, front wing, bit of rear wing stuff, but nothing radical. That's coming in Hungary, we think. Both Charles and Seb saying the right thing after FP3, which is that, the car's going in the right direction. Seb even saying it feels much, much better. Hope it stays this way. Charles, nothing like as ebullient as that. But Charles was P9, quickest of all the Ferrari runners, as it happened. Seb was 15th or 16th, something like that. Had a couple of times deducted for exceeding track limits. There are more loops in the curbs this week even than last week, so even more discipline required by the drivers over those curbs, which is a good thing, of course. But Ferrari, ultimately, both drivers, Seb and Charles, slowest through the speed traps today. I mean, what is that all about? It's obviously, You could say, well, terrible engine, but guess who was quickest through the speed trap today? Kimi Raikkonen in his Ferrari-powered Alpha. Amazing. Must have been a tow or something like that, but nonetheless, shouldn't be too hard on the engine. There's obviously some other stuff going on with the Ferrari. It's a high-rate car still, but they're not able to get it to work anything like as well as, say, the Red Bull or the McLaren. McLaren, speaking of which, very good. Lando Norris, though, went through missed some yellows in FP1 and will start with a 3-place grid penalty on Sunday. That's, that's, you could say, yeah, fair enough, deserved, a sign of the 2020s. If you actually penalised everyone that had done something like that in free practice over the last 30 years at Formula One races, the grids would be all over the place. Anyway, there it is. Lando has to take that. I'm sure he's, he's going through his learning curve. He's got his podium finish. And if it's wet, yeah, obviously you don't want to be any further down the grid than you can be. But equally, I'm sure Lando will do a good job in the wet, and it'll be fun to watch him. Speaking of which, a lot of people are saying, well, who's going to be quick in the wet? Who's quick in the wet these days? If it is a wet qualifying, which it is, if it's wet enough to go out, obviously it's going to be a lot of fun. I think Max will be really good around. It's a very short lap, which makes it kind of difficult to predict what it is going to be like, who's going to be quick in the wet around there. And there aren't that many great corners. As I say, it's all about locking up, keeping the rear stable. It's all about finding the groove. I think Max obviously will do a very good job, as will Lewis. But I think Max will probably just do Lewis tomorrow. Who knows if it's wet, but that'd be, if I had to make a prediction, I would say that. I think Charles will be right up there, probably be P3. This is assuming, of course, that nothing goes wrong with any of these guys. I think this is going to be a big moment for Carlos Sainz this weekend, because after what Lando did last Sunday, it would have eaten a little bit away at Carlos. And then beyond that, Lando's got his 3-place grid penalty. So this is a good moment for Carlos to get hold of everything and make it all happen. And we saw that today. He drove really well and he was right up there, very, very quick. I think he'll be good in the wet too. We've yet to see the big wet weather race from Carlos Sainz, but we know he is good. We assume he's good because he's dad and his rallying skill. I'm sure, and Carlos is good. There's no question about that. So I think he'll be right up there as well. And I think both racing points. And I think in the wet, Lance Stroll will probably be ahead of Sergio Perez. There's a prediction for, only because we saw how good Lance was at Monza in the Williams in 2017. Really quick, wasn't he? And he's full of confidence. Sergio Perez is driving with a new confidence and maturity, so he'll be there too. Then Sebastian Vettel, assuming he doesn't have one of his moments, inevitably will be there. I mean, he's not slow, and I think his V lining, the way he likes to drive, will suit Austria in the wet. It'll be a good way to find the grip away from the normal racing line. I think Seb will be there for that reason. And I think Alex Albon will be there. I mean, he did have some fairly fraught moments today, but as I said, on that video I did a couple of weeks ago, when you look at how good he is on medium to high speed corners, the initial turn in, he is really good. And I think that sensitivity and that sort of finesse will get him a result as well. Valtteri Bottas is the big question mark for me if it's wet in qualifying, because he will want to be right up there. He'll want to be Lewis, and he doesn't drive like Lewis, so he'll be having to put the wet weather lap together in a different way. And the way he comes out of turn 4 at the moment and approaches 5 and 6 is great for him in the dry. I'm not convinced that sort of the way he leans on the car, asks so much of the car, will work as well in the wet. That is what we have to see. And that, to me, will be the most interesting thing of all, to see how quick Valtteri is in the Mercedes relative to Lewis in the wet. So there we are. We didn't really get to see a lot of good long runs in the dry today because of all that stuff going on with people running the red Pirellis to trying to get a quick lap time out of the car. And Mercedes were there, but a bit slower than they were last week. So in terms of long runs, we haven't got that much information. But in terms of the main fundamentals, there appears to be reliability now at Red Bull and Mercedes, which is good. Max is really quick now, and the Red Bull is looking to be a better car than it was last week. Looks to be a better car. And Ferrari kind of still in trouble, but both drivers saying that from their perspective, the car does feel a bit better. So there is some hope there. Oh, one more thing. I think George Russell will be really good in the wet too. I think he'll be really good. Speaking of Williams, I hope Nicholas Latifi did a good job today on the long runs. And Jack Aitken did a very good job too. He ran in FP1 in the Williams and didn't disgrace himself, and he was kind of right there too. So well done, Jack.